For centuries, religious traditions have taught the story of Adam and Eve, the first man and woman created by God. Their tale, recounted in the book of Genesis, is one of union, temptation, and the fall of humankind. Yet, hidden in ancient texts and whispered in the corridors of forgotten history, there exists another story, one that challenges the very foundations of what we believe about the first woman. This is the untold story of Lilith, a figure shrouded in mystery, erased from mainstream teachings, and demonized in later traditions. But who was Lilith really? Her name is absent from the canonical scriptures of Judaism and Christianity, yet her presence lingers in apocryphal writings, rabbinic texts, and folklore. Some claim she was Adam's first wife, created not from his rib like Eve, but from the same earth, equal to him in every way. Others describe her as a demon, a night spirit who preyed upon children and seduced men in their dreams. Her image has evolved over the centuries, shaped by religious scholars, mystics, and poets who sought to understand or suppress her story. Why was Lilith removed from the sacred texts that so many revere? Did she pose a threat to the established order? Or was her story too controversial to be included in the accepted religious narrative? To uncover the truth, we must delve deep into the ancient writings that speak of her existence. From the earliest interpretations in Jewish mysticism to her portrayal in medieval folklore and modern feminist thought, Lilith's tale is one of rebellion, power, and defiance against subjugation. The story of Lilith is not merely an old myth buried in forgotten scrolls. It is a story that challenges our understanding of the role of women in religious history. It is a narrative that speaks of autonomy, choice, and consequence. It raises questions about authority, submission, and the fear of a woman who refuses to bow. Why has she been cast in the shadows for so long? What truths does her story reveal about ancient societies and their treatment of strong-willed women? As we embark on this journey, we will explore how different traditions have portrayed Lilith. We will examine the texts that mention her, the legends that grew around her name, and the symbols that she represents. But before we can understand the significance of Lilith, we must first ask, why has her story been hidden for so long? The absence of Lilith's name from the canonical texts of Judaism and Christianity is one of the greatest mysteries surrounding her existence. Unlike Eve, whose story is prominently featured in the book of Genesis, Lilith is a ghost in the scriptures, a figure mentioned only in passing, if at all. Yet, traces of her presence exist in the margins of religious tradition, hidden within apocryphal writings, rabbinic discussions, and mystical interpretations. Why was she erased? Was her existence too dangerous for the established order? To understand Lilith's disappearance, we must first recognize the sources where she might have once been present. The oldest known references to Lilith come from Mesopotamian mythology, where she was depicted as a night spirit or demon. Ancient Sumerian texts speak of a female entity named Lilitu, a winged creature associated with the wind, desolation, and lust. The Akkadian and Babylonian traditions also mention similar figures, suggesting that Lilith's origins predate even the Hebrew scriptures. These early portrayals painted her as a dangerous presence, a being who lurked in the night, unsettling the natural order. In Jewish tradition, the earliest explicit mention of Lilith appears in the alphabet of Ben Sira, an apocryphal text believed to have been written between the 8th and 10th centuries CE. This text tells the story of Lilith as Adam's first wife, a woman who refused to submit to her husband's authority and ultimately left Eden. Though not part of the Hebrew Bible, this account sheds light on why Lilith's presence was problematic. She challenged the very notion of male dominance, a foundational aspect of the patriarchal society in which these texts were written. But Lilith's erasure likely began much earlier. In the Hebrew Bible, there is a single passage in Isaiah 34 verse 14 that some scholars believe refers to her. The verse describes a desolate land where wild creatures dwell, mentioning a figure known as Lilith who finds rest there. While later translations soften this reference, changing Lilith into a mere night creature or screech owl, the original Hebrew suggests a much more specific being. Could this be a remnant of an older tradition that once recognized Lilith as something more than a simple demon? The Talmud, one of Judaism's most authoritative collections of teachings and interpretations, also contains scattered references to Lilith. In some discussions, she is depicted as a spirit that brings harm to infants and pregnant women, reinforcing her demonic image. The rabbis of the Talmudic era may have been aware of earlier traditions that spoke of Lilith's connection to Adam, but by the time these texts were compiled, her role had already shifted from a potential first woman to a feared supernatural entity. Why would religious authorities seek to erase or alter Lilith's story? The answer may lie in the power structures of ancient society. A woman who refused to be controlled, who demanded equality, and who abandoned her role as a subordinate wife would have been seen as a direct challenge to the societal norms of the time. The story of Adam and Eve, in contrast, presents a clear hierarchy. Eve is made from Adam, signifying her dependence on him. But Lilith, if she truly existed in the original traditions, did not fit this mold. She was not created from Adam, but alongside him, a woman who claimed equal status. As the dominant religious institutions solidified their teachings, stories that conflicted with their moral and social frameworks were often dismissed, altered, or reinterpreted. Lilith, a figure who embodied resistance, became an inconvenient presence. Rather than include her story in the scriptures, religious scholars and scribes may have chosen to suppress it, leaving only faint echoes of her existence in mystical and folkloric traditions. Yet, despite these efforts to erase her, Lilith's story refused to disappear entirely. Over time, she would resurface in Jewish mysticism, medieval folklore, and esoteric writings, evolving into an even more enigmatic and feared figure. But before we explore how she changed over the centuries, we must first look at what the ancient texts suggest about her earliest role. If Lilith was truly Adam's first wife, what does that mean for our understanding of the creation story? Since ancient times, the story of Adam and Eve has been recognized as the ultimate account of humanity's first union. However, some ancient sources suggest that Eve was not the first woman at all. Instead, there are indications that another woman, Lilith, preceded her, a woman who was created not as a subordinate, but as Adam's equal. If this is true, it challenges the traditional understanding of human creation and raises profound questions about the nature of relationships, power, and autonomy. The book of Genesis presents two different creation accounts, which, when examined closely, reveal a potential discrepancy. In Genesis 1 verse 27, the text states, "So God created man in his own image, in the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." This passage suggests that man and woman were created simultaneously as equals. In Genesis 2 verses 21 to 22, a second, more detailed account appears. "So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man." This second version is the one most widely recognized in religious teachings. It describes Eve's creation from Adam's rib, implying that she was formed from him, rather than alongside him. This difference in the two creation accounts has led some scholars and religious thinkers to theorize that the first version refers to an earlier woman, one who was created at the same time as Adam. This woman, they argue, was Lilith. Unlike Eve, who was made from a part of Adam, Lilith was formed from the same earth, the same substance, making her equal in nature and status. This interpretation appears in later Jewish mystical writings, particularly in the alphabet of Ben Sira, which explicitly names Lilith as Adam's first wife. According to this tradition, Adam and Lilith were created together, but soon clashed over their roles. Lilith refused to submit to Adam, insisting that they were made from the same material and should therefore have the same rights. In one version of the story, their conflict was expressed through an argument about their intimate relationship. Lilith refused to always be beneath Adam, asserting that she had as much authority as he did. Adam, unwilling to accept her independence, sought to dominate her, but Lilith would not yield. This defiance set Lilith apart from Eve in a fundamental way. Eve's story, as told in Genesis, presents her as a companion to Adam, a helper created specifically for him. She does not challenge her role, at least not until she is tempted by the serpent. Lilith, in contrast, was independent from the beginning. She did not need Adam's approval to define her existence, and when she found their relationship oppressive, she made the radical choice to leave. This raises an intriguing question. If Lilith was the first woman, why does the book of Genesis not explicitly mention her departure? Some believe her story was deliberately excluded from the official narrative because it did not align with the patriarchal ideals of later religious authorities. The image of a woman who refused to submit, who rejected the authority of her male counterpart, was too dangerous to be widely taught. Instead, Lilith was cast out, both from Eden and from religious texts, leaving Eve to take her place as the more obedient, compliant partner to Adam. But Lilith's story did not end with her departure. While Eve remained in the garden, Lilith was already beginning a new chapter, one that would transform her into a figure of exile, defiance, and eventually, darkness. Before we examine her fall from grace, we must first understand what led to her ultimate decision to leave Adam and the consequences that followed. The conflict between Adam and Lilith was not a mere misunderstanding. It was a fundamental clash of identities, beliefs, and power. According to the alphabet of Ben Sira, their relationship was doomed from the beginning because Lilith refused to accept a role of submission. She did not see herself as secondary to Adam, nor did she believe that he had the right to dominate her. This defiance set her apart, making her a unique figure in religious history, one who would be both vilified and revered for her unwillingness to conform. The most famous version of this story describes how their arguments centered around equality, particularly in their intimate relationship. Lilith insisted that because she and Adam were created from the same earth, they should be equals in every aspect of their lives. Adam, however, expected her to accept a subordinate role in accordance with the hierarchy that would later define traditional gender roles. Lilith refused. Some sources suggest that she did not merely resist Adam's expectations, she outright rejected them, refusing to be controlled by a man who saw himself as superior. As their dispute intensified, Lilith took an unprecedented step. She spoke the secret name of God and used it to flee Eden. This act was not only a rejection of Adam, but also of the divine order that had placed them together. By invoking God's name, she demonstrated a profound knowledge of the divine, something typically reserved for holy men and prophets. Some interpretations suggest that this act gave her power, allowing her to escape the confines of Eden and live independently. Adam, now alone, was distraught. He turned to God, pleading for Lilith to return. In some versions of the tale, God sent 3 angels, Senoi, Sansanoi, and Semengeloth, to retrieve her. The angels found Lilith near the Red Sea, a place often associated with demons and dark spirits in ancient mythology. They commanded her to return to Adam, but Lilith refused once again. In response, the angels threatened her, telling her that if she did not obey, they would kill 100 of her children each day. Some stories claim that rather than submit, Lilith embraced this curse, vowing to seek vengeance by harming newborn infants, a legend that contributed to her later reputation as a child-stealing demon. But was Lilith truly a monster, or was she simply a woman who refused to live under oppression? Theological interpretations vary widely. To some, Lilith is a symbol of rebellion against divine authority, a warning against defying the roles assigned by God. In this view, her exile is a punishment for disobedience, much like the punishment later given to Eve for eating the forbidden fruit. To others, however, Lilith represents strength, independence, and self-determination. Rather than remain in a relationship that did not honor her as an equal, she chose exile and freedom over submission and comfort. This interpretation has led many modern thinkers, particularly in feminist theology, to view Lilith not as a villain, but as an early symbol of female empowerment. She is a figure who refuses to be controlled, who asserts her autonomy, and who rejects a world in which men hold absolute power over women. However, for centuries, religious traditions portrayed her in a darker light, emphasizing her departure as an act of rebellion rather than liberation. With Lilith gone, Adam remained alone in Eden, and it was then that God decided to create a new woman, one who would not resist submission as Lilith had. Eve was formed not from the same earth as Adam, but from his rib, signifying her dependence on him. This fundamental difference set the stage for the contrasting legacies of the two women, Lilith, the exiled rebel, and Eve, the obedient companion. Lilith's story did not end with her departure from Eden. In exile, she underwent a transformation, one that would reshape her into a feared figure in mythology and religious traditions. What happened to Lilith after she left Adam? How did she become associated with darkness and supernatural forces? To understand this, we must now explore the consequences of her exile and the curse that would follow her for eternity. Lilith's decision to leave Eden was not just an act of defiance, it was a turning point that would redefine her place in history. Once she uttered the sacred name of God and fled, she stepped into a world unknown, a place beyond the boundaries of divine order. But her escape did not mean freedom without consequence. What followed was a transformation, one that turned her from a woman into something else entirely, a figure feared, misunderstood, and forever linked to darkness. Tradition holds that Lilith settled near the Red Sea, a region long linked in ancient texts to demonic forces and chaos. Some interpretations suggest that her time there signified the start of her descent into mythological darkness. Isolated from Eden, from Adam, and from the divine harmony of creation, she came to be seen as something unnatural by those who shaped her story. The most well-known version of Lilith's punishment comes from the alphabet of Ben Sira, where three angels, Senoi, Sansonoi, and Semengeloth, were sent by God to persuade her to return to Adam. They found her in exile and warned her of divine retribution. If she refused to go back, 100 of her children would die each day. Lilith, however, did not submit. Instead, she embraced her new identity, making a dark covenant. If she could not be a wife in Eden, she would become something else entirely. The death of her children, as the legend goes, led Lilith to take on a new, sinister role. If she could not have her own offspring, she would turn her wrath toward the children of others. This is where her reputation as a child-stealing demon first began. Ancient Jewish texts describe Lilith as a nocturnal spirit who preys on infants, particularly newborns, and women in childbirth. Protective amulets bearing the names of the three angels were often placed near cribs to ward off her presence. Lilith's transformation into a feared figure may not have been a reflection of her true nature, but rather a response to a deeper fear, a woman who existed outside divine authority. In many ancient cultures, powerful women who defied traditional roles were often recast as witches, spirits, or demons. Lilith's story followed this pattern. Once a woman who sought equality, she became a dark force in the imagination of later generations, a figure whose very name was feared. Her demonic associations were further solidified in the Talmud, where she is described as a winged creature with the ability to seduce men in their sleep. She became known as a succubus, a female demon who visited men at night, causing them to have illicit dreams. These portrayals reinforced her as a symbol of forbidden temptation, desire, and unrestrained female power, qualities that many ancient societies sought to control. There are deeper questions to consider. Was Lilith's punishment truly divine, or was it shaped by later religious authorities seeking to justify why a woman who refused submission could not be part of the sacred narrative? Her story, after all, stands in stark contrast to that of Eve, who, despite her transgression, was forgiven and remained part of the human lineage. Lilith, on the other hand, was cast into obscurity, remembered only in whispers and warnings. Yet, despite efforts to erase her, Lilith's name never truly disappeared. Over time, she evolved into something more than just a demon. She became a figure of mystery, a subject of Jewish mysticism, and even, to some, a goddess of immense power. Before exploring how her image transformed, it is essential to consider whether Lilith was always seen as purely evil, or if some traditions viewed her differently. Lilith's transformation did not end with her exile from Eden. While early traditions depicted her as a vengeful spirit who preyed on infants and seduced men in their sleep, Jewish mysticism, particularly Kabbalah, expanded her image, deepening her connection to both the demonic and the divine. Over time, she became more than just Adam's rebellious wife or a child-stealing demon. She evolved into a complex figure, one that straddled the boundary between destruction and power. One of the most significant developments in Lilith's mythology occurred in the Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah. In this mystical tradition, Lilith was no longer just a wandering spirit. She was part of a larger cosmic structure, a force associated with the Sitra, Akra, the other side, the realm of impurity and evil that opposes divine holiness. In some passages of the Zohar, Lilith is described as the consort of Samael, a powerful fallen angel often identified with Satan or a prince of demons. Together, they ruled over dark forces, acting as a counterbalance to the divine order upheld by God. However, Lilith's role in Kabbalah was not purely malevolent. Unlike earlier depictions that reduced her to a demonic seductress, Kabbalistic traditions imbued her with a more profound significance. She became associated with the Qliphoth, the shadow side of the Sephirot, the 10 emanations through which God interacts with the universe. While the Sephirot represent divine attributes like wisdom, mercy, and justice, the Qliphoth embody distortion, imbalance, and excess. Lilith's presence in this mystical framework suggests that she was not merely a demon, but a necessary aspect of the cosmic order, an embodiment of unchecked power and unrestrained femininity. In some traditions, Lilith was linked to the Shekinah, the feminine aspect of God. This duality is striking. On one hand, Shekinah represents divine presence, wisdom, and light, while Lilith embodies chaos, desire, and the unknown. Some mystics believed that Lilith was the dark reflection of the Shekinah, a figure that emerged when the feminine divine was cast out or suppressed. This idea resonated with later thinkers who saw Lilith not as a villain, but as a lost aspect of divinity, one that had been demonized due to fear and misunderstanding. Beyond Jewish mysticism, Lilith's image also appeared in Gnostic traditions, where she was sometimes associated with Sophia, the personification of wisdom. In certain Gnostic texts, Sophia's descent into the material world and her subsequent redemption mirror Lilith's own journey, from exile to empowerment. While mainstream religious authorities sought to suppress Lilith's story, mystical traditions preserved her presence, albeit in a darker, more enigmatic form. Lilith was not seen as purely evil in every culture. In ancient Mesopotamian and Canaanite traditions, Female deities associated with independence, sexuality, and night were often revered rather than feared. Early traces of Lilith's origins may connect two goddesses like Inanna, Ishtar, the Mesopotamian goddess of love and war, or Lamashtu, a fierce, child-snatching deity who also had protective qualities. These figures were not merely malevolent. They embodied both destruction and creation, existing as powerful, untamed forces of nature. Even in medieval times, Lilith was not always depicted as entirely wicked. Jewish legends tell of women invoking her name for protection, believing that her power could be harnessed for their defense. In these stories, she is not a mindless demon, but a formidable presence, one to be feared, respected, or even admired. Over centuries, Lilith's name carried contradictions. To some, she represented darkness and temptation. To others, she was a goddess in exile, a lost aspect of the divine feminine. The answer depended on who was telling the story. Religious authorities framed her as a cautionary tale of disobedience, while mystics and alternative traditions preserved her as a figure of power and mystery. Lilith's evolution did not end in ancient times. As her image shifted in Jewish mysticism, she continued to appear in folklore and superstition, where her legend took on new forms, some terrifying, others deeply symbolic. To understand how she became the infamous Night Mother, feared across cultures and whispered about in the dark, it is essential to explore her role in medieval and early modern folklore. By the medieval period, Lilith had fully transitioned from a shadowy figure in ancient texts to one of the most feared supernatural beings in Jewish and Christian folklore. She was no longer just Adam's rebellious wife or a mystical embodiment of the feminine divine. She had become the Night Mother, a dark, malevolent force blamed for misfortune, infertility, and death. Her legend spread far beyond religious circles, entering the realm of superstition, where she haunted the minds of those who feared what lurked in the darkness. One of the most enduring aspects of Lilith's folklore is her association with newborn children and pregnant women. In many cultures, it was believed that Lilith prowled the night, searching for infants to steal or harm. This belief stemmed from earlier Jewish traditions that depicted her as vengeful after the loss of her own children. According to the alphabet of Ben Sira, God's punishment for Lilith's defiance was the death of 100 of her children each day. In response, she vowed to take revenge by attacking the children of others. This led to the widespread custom of placing protective amulets, often inscribed with the names of the three angels, Senoi, Sansonoi, and Semengeloff, above cribs or on pregnant women to ward off her presence. Lilith's reputation as a child-stealing demon spread across Europe, influencing medieval and early modern fears about infant mortality. The concept of the changeling, a child supposedly stolen by fairies or demons and replaced with a sickly or unnatural substitute, bears striking similarities to the Lilith legend. In Jewish homes, newborn boys were often watched closely during their first 8 days of life until their circumcision, as it was believed they were most vulnerable to Lilith's attack. But Lilith was not only feared as a predator of children. She also took on the role of the succubus, a seductive night demon who preyed on men in their sleep. Medieval Christian demonology classified Lilith among the succubi, spirits that lured men into forbidden unions and drained their vitality. Many accounts describe her as a beautiful but deadly figure, one who tempted men into sinful dreams and impure thoughts. The fear of Lilith in this form was not merely about supernatural danger. It was also a reflection of societal anxieties about uncontrolled female sexuality. In many ways, Lilith became a scapegoat for unexplained tragedies. If a baby died unexpectedly, Lilith was to blame. If a man had an erotic dream, it was because Lilith had visited him. If a woman struggled with infertility, it was believed that Lilith's curse had fallen upon her. In a time when medical knowledge was limited, folklore provided supernatural explanations for the mysteries of life and death, and Lilith's legend filled the gaps left by uncertainty and fear. However, not all depictions of Lilith were entirely demonic. In some folk traditions, she was seen as a protector of women who had been wronged by men. Certain magical practices invoked her name not in fear, but in power, calling upon her spirit to assist in matters of independence, love, or revenge. These interpretations, though rare in medieval Europe, hinted at the later reclaiming of Lilith as a figure of female autonomy. The folklore surrounding Lilith reveals more than just the fears of the past. It also reflects the deeper, symbolic role she played in the human psyche. She was the embodiment of everything that society sought to control: the untamed woman, the mother who rejects motherhood, the seductress who cannot be dominated. She represented chaos in a world that longed for order, and because of that, she was cast as the ultimate night mother, feared and reviled for centuries. In recent times, Lilith has undergone a dramatic transformation. No longer just a demon of the night or a cautionary tale of defiance, she has been reclaimed as a symbol of feminine power, autonomy, and rebellion against oppressive systems. Literature, feminism, and pop culture have reshaped her image, turning her from a feared villain into an icon of independence and strength. Her journey from the shadows of mythology to the forefront of feminist thought is a testament to how societies reinterpret ancient figures to reflect contemporary values. The second wave feminist movement of the 20th century played a crucial role in Lilith's revival. As women began challenging traditional gender roles, the story of Lilith, who refused to be subservient to Adam, resonated deeply. Unlike Eve, who was fashioned from Adam's rib to be his companion, Lilith was created as his equal. Her refusal to submit became a powerful metaphor for female resistance against patriarchal norms. One of the earliest and most influential feminist reimaginings of Lilith came from Judith Plasko, a Jewish feminist theologian. In her 1972 essay, The Coming of Lilith, Plasko reinterpreted the biblical narrative, portraying Lilith as a woman who leaves Eden not because she is wicked, but because she refuses to accept a system that oppresses her. In Plasko's retelling, Lilith and Eve eventually reunite outside the garden, realizing that they are not enemies but allies in their shared struggle for liberation. This version of Lilith challenged the traditional narrative, offering an alternative where women support each other rather than being defined by their relationships to men. Lilith's influence also extended into literature and poetry. In the 19th century, British poet Dante Gabriel Rossetti depicted her in his poem Lilith, describing her as a beautiful yet dangerous figure, a femme fatale whose power lies in her ability to enchant and destroy. In the 20th century, writers such as Angela Carter and Marge Pierkey embraced Lilith as a symbol of female autonomy, using her story to explore themes of sexuality, rebellion, and self-discovery. Beyond literature, Lilith has left her mark on music, art, and film. In 1997, musician Sarah McLachlan founded the Lilith Fair, a groundbreaking music festival celebrating female artists. The festival's name was a direct nod to Lilith's legacy as a woman who refused to be silenced. In the world of visual art, Lilith has been reimagined in various forms, from a sensual, winged goddess to a fierce warrior, reflecting the multiple layers of her identity. Popular culture has also embraced Lilith, incorporating her into films, television series, and video games. She appears in everything from horror films to fantasy epics, often depicted as a powerful sorceress or a misunderstood anti-hero. Shows like Supernatural, True Blood, and The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina have all drawn upon Lilith's mythos, reinforcing her presence in the modern imagination. Video games such as Diablo 4 and Borderlands have also featured Lilith-inspired characters, often portraying her as an embodiment of chaos and strength. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Lilith's modern resurgence is her role as a feminist and spiritual icon. Some contemporary spiritual movements, particularly within neo-paganism and Wicca, view Lilith not as a demon, but as a goddess of female empowerment. She represents independence, sexual freedom, and the courage to challenge authority. For many, invoking Lilith's name is not an act of fear, but of reclamation, a declaration of self-ownership and defiance against oppression. The transformation of Lilith from a demonized figure to a feminist icon reflects the evolving nature of myth. What was once a story of condemnation has become a story of liberation. But as Lilith's legacy continues to grow, one question remains: what can her story teach us today? How does her journey from exile to empowerment challenge our understanding of gender, power, and spirituality? Lilith's story is more than just an ancient myth. It is a reflection of deeply rooted cultural fears, shifting societal values, and the ongoing struggle over gender, power, and autonomy. Her transformation from an obscure, demonized figure to a modern symbol of independence reveals how history is often shaped by those who hold the power to tell the story. But was Lilith truly a villain? Or was she a misunderstood figure whose defiance challenged the very foundations of the world she was born into? One of the most significant lessons from Lilith's story is the power of choice and self-determination. Unlike Eve, who remained in Eden and accepted the role given to her, Lilith chose to leave rather than submit to a life that did not honor her autonomy. In doing so, she became one of the first known figures in religious mythology to exercise free will in defiance of societal expectations. Her decision to leave Eden was not one of rebellion for its own sake. It was a declaration that she would not be controlled, no matter the cost. This theme of resistance resonates deeply in discussions about gender roles and authority. Throughout history, societies have often sought to define and control the role of women, dictating how they should behave, whom they should serve, and what limitations should be placed upon them. Lilith stands as a stark contrast to these expectations. She was created as Adam's equal, yet she was condemned for refusing to be his subordinate. This mirrors the experiences of countless women throughout history who have faced ostracization for refusing to conform to traditional roles. Lilith's story also challenges our understanding of good and evil. In early traditions, she was cast as a demonic force, a being who preyed on the innocent and sought destruction. But when viewed through a different lens, her actions take on new meaning. Was she truly evil for refusing to submit? Was she monstrous for choosing exile over oppression? Or was she feared because she represented something that ancient societies were not ready to accept, the idea of a woman who exists on her own terms, without the need for male approval? Another important aspect of Lilith's legacy is how she embodies the dual nature of the feminine, both nurturing and destructive, both creator and force of chaos. This duality is found in many ancient goddesses, from Inanna to Kali, figures who hold power that can be both feared and revered. Lilith, too, carries this contradiction. She is blamed for child loss and seduction, yet she is also seen as a protector of women in some traditions. She is both a figure of fear and a source of empowerment. This complexity forces us to question simplistic narratives that define women and power itself in binary terms. Lilith's resurgence in modern feminism and popular culture is not just about reclaiming a demonized woman. It is about challenging the structures that labeled her a demon in the first place. She has become a symbol of rebellion against oppression, of strength in the face of exile, and of the courage to forge one's own path, even when the cost is high. Her story reminds us that the voices of the past, especially those silenced by history, still have something to teach us today. As we reflect on Lilith's legacy, we are left with a final question. Is she a cautionary tale or an inspiration? To those who see her as a villain, she is a warning against disobedience and defiance. But to those who see her as a heroine, she represents the right to choose one's destiny, regardless of the consequences. In the end, Lilith's story is not just about the past, it is about the present and the future. It is a reminder that the narratives we inherit are not set in stone, and that the power to define who we are rests not in the hands of those who would control us, but within ourselves. If you found this exploration of Lilith's Untold story fascinating, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history, mythology, and spiritual mysteries. Like this video to support the content, and let us know in the comments, who do you think Lilith really was? A villain, a misunderstood figure, or something else entirely? And most importantly, share this video with your friends and family so that more people can discover the hidden truths of history. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.